The day my parents' will was read, I learned that grief can cut you twice, once through loss, and again through betrayal. I sat stiffly in the mahogany office of our family lawyer, Margaret Brooks. The Florida sun streamed through the window behind her, but it brought no warmth. My palms were damp against the armrests of the chair, my heart pounding so hard I was sure the sound would give me away. Beside me, my sister Vanessa was the picture of composure. Her dark hair fell in sleek waves over her tailored blazer, her perfectly manicured nails tapping rhythmically against the desk. That tapping, it echoed like a countdown, as if she already knew what was coming. And maybe she did. Margaret cleared her throat and adjusted her glasses. Her voice was steady, rehearsed, devoid of emotion. As per your parents' final wishes, the entirety of the Carter estate, including Carter Hotels, the Miami beachfront properties, and all remaining financial assets, will be inherited by Vanessa Carter. The words hit me like a brick to the chest. My breath caught. I gripped the chair tighter, my knuckles turning white. There had to be a mistake. There had to be. That can't be right, I managed to say, though my voice cracked under the weight of disbelief. Vanessa's lips curled into that familiar smirk, the one she'd perfected since we were kids. No mistake, sweetie. Mom and Dad knew exactly what they were doing. They chose the child who could handle it. Handle it. That phrase sliced deeper than I thought possible. Like every effort I had made, every late-night shift, every time I stepped in to cover for her failures, meant nothing. They had seen me as nothing more than the good sister, the one with a kind heart but not a sharp mind. Margaret slid an envelope across the desk. There is a personal letter for you, Emily, she said gently. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The paper felt heavier than it should have. I unfolded it, recognizing my mother's elegant cursive, the handwriting I had grown up seeing on birthday cards and notes in my lunchbox. Dearest Emily. We know this decision will hurt you, but we believe it's for the best. Vanessa has always shown the business acumen necessary to continue our legacy. You, my love, have the kindest heart. We trust you will find your own happiness outside of this responsibility. We love you, ***. Mom and Dad. My vision blurred. My throat tightened. A kind heart, that's what they reduced me to. Not competent. Not capable. Just, kind. I crushed the paper in my fist, my nails digging into my palm to keep the tears at bay. Vanessa rose, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve. I have a groundbreaking ceremony tomorrow, she said breezily. Carter Oceanfront Resort. We're making it the premier destination on the coast. Don't worry, Em, I'll make sure the Carter legacy stays intact. Her smile was razor-sharp, cutting through any pretense of sisterly affection. You can come to the ribbon cutting, front row, if you'd like. The door clicked shut behind her. Silence filled the room, but it wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. I held my breath as long as I could, until it all broke loose in a single, shuddering exhale. Tears welled up, but I bit them back. Crying wouldn't change anything. Crying wouldn't make them see me differently. Margaret shifted uncomfortably, but stayed quiet. She'd known my parents for years, she knew what this meant. After a moment, she leaned in, voice soft. Emily. I know this is difficult. Difficult? I let out a bitter laugh, though it sounded more like a choked sob. They cut me out completely. Their own daughter. I'm sorry, she said. And for the first time that day, I heard something genuine, pity, maybe even guilt. But pity wouldn't fix this either. I left the office with my mother's letter still balled up in my hand. The humid Miami air hit me as I stepped onto the sidewalk, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing. I could hear Vanessa's voice in my head, her condescending tone. Some people are made for success. Some people aren't. For so long, I had let them define me. The kind one. The quiet one. The artist. The sister who stayed out of the way while Vanessa took the spotlight. But that day, something shifted inside me. Something cracked open. I was done being their afterthought. I wasn't going to fight for their approval anymore. No, this was about something bigger now. I needed to prove to myself that I was more than their assumptions. So, I made a promise right there on that hot Florida sidewalk. One day, I would show them exactly who I was. Not the good sister. Not the disappointment. But someone they never saw coming. Do you think I gave up? No. That was the day everything changed. Do you think this is fair? Would you accept being pushed aside by your own family like this? Comment 111 if you think this is completely unfair. After I left Margaret's office that day, clutching my mother's letter in my hand like it was some cruel joke, I drove back to my small apartment on the other side of Miami. The studio I rented was barely 400 square feet, with peeling paint and a window that rattled every time the wind blew in off the coast. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I sat at the wobbly kitchen table, rereading my mother's words over and over again, "You have the kindest heart." That was their final judgment of me. A kind heart. Nothing more. I stared out at the flickering neon sign from the bodega across the street and felt the weight of every sacrifice I had made for my family. Sacrifices that, now, seemed invisible to everyone but me. I was 16 when I took my first job waiting tables at a beachfront restaurant. Carter Hotels was doing fine back then, but my parents always believed in teaching us the value of work. Or at least, that's what they told me. Vanessa never had to scrub grease off plates after closing or carry trays heavy with seafood platters to drunk tourists. No, Vanessa interned at Dad's office, shadowing executives, attending board meetings. They called it learning the business. I called it what it was, preparing her for the future they had already decided for her. After school, I'd race to my shift, tying my apron as I ran in through the back door. I'd work until midnight, my feet aching, before coming home to finish my homework under the dim kitchen light. Sometimes, Vanessa would be there, lounging on the couch, scrolling through Instagram, talking about the new pair of designer heels Mom had bought her. The differences between us had always been there, subtle at first, like faint cracks in a glass, but over the years, they became impossible to ignore. On my 18th birthday, Vanessa got a Range Rover, wrapped in a giant red bow. Me? I got a used Toyota Corolla that barely made it down the street without sputtering. I was grateful for it, don't get me wrong, but it was clear what kind of future they envisioned for each of us. College was my escape. I worked 2 part-time jobs, just to afford it. During the day, I helped clean hotel rooms at one of the smaller Carter properties. At night, I bartended. I learned how to fake a smile while wiping down counters, even when exhaustion made my hands shake. Vanessa, meanwhile, was at the University of Miami, networking at sorority events, making connections that would later become her investor circle. Graduation day was supposed to be a moment of pride. I had pushed through, no handouts, no family money. Just me. But even that day wasn't mine. The university had asked a successful alumna to give the commencement speech. Vanessa. I remember standing in my cap and gown, clutching my diploma, heart swelling with pride, until Vanessa took the stage. She spoke about resilience and leadership, about how some people are natural-born leaders. Then she smiled, pausing just long enough for the crowd to hang on her words. And others, she said with a little laugh, well, they find their own little paths. The audience chuckled. People turned to look at me. They all knew who she was talking about. My face burned as I forced a smile, but inside, I was crumbling. That was Vanessa. That was my family. No matter how hard I worked, I was always just the other sister. The kind one. The small one. The one who stayed behind to lock up the house when everyone else flew off to Aspen for Christmas. After graduation, I moved back to Miami, hoping maybe this time, things would be different. I offered ideas, real ideas, to help the hotels. I suggested a cafe in one of the lobbies, a place where locals and tourists could gather. It would have brought life into the space, connected the hotel to the community. My father barely glanced at my proposal before pushing it aside. Emily, honey, you're great with plants. Maybe you could help with the landscaping instead. So, I nodded, smiled, and went outside to water the shrubs. That was my role, filling in the gaps. If a maid called in sick, I made beds. When mom and dad traveled, I stayed home, paid the bills, and checked on the properties. I made sure Vanessa's apartment was stocked with groceries when she had meetings. When her event planners quit last minute, I stayed up all night creating seating charts and floral arrangements. Vanessa would smile, thank me sweetly in front of everyone, then take all the credit when the event was praised. And every time, I told myself it was okay. That's what family does. We help each other. But what happens when helping turns into being stepped on? When your sacrifices aren't even seen? There was one night I'll never forget. A storm had rolled in off the Atlantic, flooding the lower levels of one of our smaller hotels. Vanessa was supposed to be managing it, but she was at a gala, some charity thing that made the headlines the next day. I spent the entire night bailing water alongside the maintenance crew, up to my ankles in sewage. When Vanessa showed up the next afternoon, wearing sunglasses and nursing a hangover, she gave a brief press statement about swift crisis management. She got a standing ovation from the board. I got a pat on the back from Dad and a suggestion that maybe I should consider getting certified in housekeeping. I smiled. I always smiled. But inside, something was breaking. Piece by piece. So when I sat in Margaret's office that day and heard those words, Vanessa gets everything, it wasn't just about the money. It was about every late night, every backhanded compliment, every time I was told I was good, but not good enough. It was every time my dreams were dismissed as hobbies, while Vanessa's whims were called vision. I know what you might be thinking. Why didn't I stand up for myself? Why didn't I demand more? Because when the people who are supposed to love you the most tell you, over and over, that you are less, sometimes, you start to believe it. But not anymore. I stared at that letter from my mother, calling me their kind-hearted daughter, and realized I was done being kind at my own expense. I was done being invisible. Have you ever felt that way? Like no matter what you do, you'll never be seen for who you really are? Comment 222 if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. 3 weeks after the will was read, I found myself standing at the edge of a perfectly manicured lawn, the salty breeze from the Atlantic brushing against my face. The groundbreaking ceremony for Carter Oceanfront Resort was in full swing. A gleaming white tent stretched over rows of chairs filled with Miami's business elite, developers, investors, city officials, all eager to witness Vanessa Carter's next triumph. I shouldn't have come. Every cell in my body had told me to stay home, to spare myself the humiliation. But something stronger, pride, maybe defiance, pushed me there. If they wanted me to be invisible, I would stand right in front of them, smiling, even as it tore me apart inside. Vanessa stood on the stage, poised and glowing under the midday sun. Her designer suit was crisp, her makeup flawless, her hair styled in waves that probably took a professional 2 hours to perfect. She was holding court, as she always had, commanding attention like she was born for it. I lingered at the back, avoiding eye contact, pretending to admire the ocean view. But I heard every word. "We're not just building a resort," Vanessa declared, her voice carrying over the crowd, smooth and confident. "We're building a legacy. One that honors my parents and the Carter name." Applause followed. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. And then, as if she'd sensed my presence, Vanessa's gaze swept over the crowd and landed on me. Her lips curved into that knowing smile, the one she reserved for me, the one that said, "I win." "Oh, and I'm so glad my sister Emily is here today," she announced, her voice honeyed but sharp. "She's more into arts and crafts, but we all support her little hobbies." Laughter erupted, light, polite, but it was enough. My cheeks burned as the cameras turned toward me. A lens zoomed in. A reporter whispered something to the person beside her. I forced a smile, nodded like it was all good fun, but my stomach twisted into knots. I felt like I was 17 again, standing in that auditorium on graduation day, being reduced to the other sister in front of hundreds of people. The ceremony continued, but I didn't hear the rest. I stood there, my fists clenched at my sides, my smile plastered on, while Vanessa posed with a golden shovel for the photographers. Later that evening, back in my apartment, I stared at the same walls I'd looked at every night since my parents died. The space felt smaller, suffocating. Vanessa's voice echoed in my mind, little hobbies, as if my dreams, my work, everything I had ever tried to build, were nothing but a child's pastime. Alex showed up around 8 p.m., carrying a bottle of cheap red wine. He didn't even knock, he just let himself in like he always had. He took one look at me, slumped on the couch with mascara smudged under my eyes, and he knew. "She did it again, didn't she?" he said, sitting beside me and pouring 2 glasses. I nodded, taking the wine without a word. "What was it this time?" I laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that hurt. "Arts and crafts." Alex cursed under his breath. He'd seen it all over the years, the way Vanessa cut me down, the way my parents overlooked me. He'd been there after graduation, when I cried in his car for an hour because my sister had turned my achievement into her punchline. "She thinks you're nothing, Em," he said, his voice low but firm. "Are you really gonna let her win? Again?" I stared into my glass, the wine swirling like blood. My heart pounded faster, but it wasn't sadness this time. It was anger. Pure, hot, and electric. "No," I whispered. Alex leaned in. "What?" I looked up at him, my eyes burning. "No. She has no idea what I'm capable of." And in that moment, something shifted. It was like a switch had flipped inside me. For years, I had played the role they assigned me, the good sister, the helper, the one who stayed quiet and let others shine. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I couldn't be. I was done. I stood up, pacing the room, my mind racing faster than it ever had. "She thinks I'm still that girl who waters the plants and cleans up after her," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "But I've been building something, Alex. They didn't see it because they never bothered to look. But I have investments. I know this business. And Vanessa, she's about to find out exactly who she underestimated." Alex grinned. "Now that's the Emily I know." We stayed up until midnight, talking through ideas, half-baked schemes at first, fueled by wine and adrenaline. But the more we talked, the more the pieces started to fall into place. I had the leverage. I had been quietly investing in Sunko Supplies, the company Vanessa's entire resort project relied on. If I increased my stake, I could control her supply chain. And if I pulled support at the right moment, her whole empire, this carefully crafted image of perfection, would crumble. "She's not as untouchable as she thinks," I said, feeling power surge through me for the first time in years. Alex raised his glass. To the Carter sister they never saw coming. We clinked glasses. The wine tasted better now, sweeter, sharper. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about every moment Vanessa had humiliated me, every time my parents chose her over me. And I realized something, I didn't just want revenge. I needed to prove, to them, to her, to myself, that I was more than the kind one. I was smart. I was capable. And I was ready. Have you ever reached that point? That moment when you knew you couldn't take it anymore, when you realized it was time to fight back? Comment 333 if you think it's time for her to fight back. After that night with Alex, the night I finally said the words out loud, the night I admitted to myself that I was done being pushed aside, I didn't waste any time. I woke up the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The old Emily would have simmered in anger for a few days, maybe cried into her pillow, then swallowed it all down and smiled the next time Vanessa called me for a favor. But that Emily was gone. The Emily who walked into Margaret Brooks's office that afternoon was someone else entirely. Margaret looked up from her desk, surprised to see me so soon after the will reading. "Emily," she said, her voice cautious. How are you holding up? I closed the door behind me. I need your help. But not in the way you think. She raised an eyebrow, setting her pen down. Go on. I slid a folder across her desk, financial statements, stock holdings, investment records. Margaret's eyes flicked across the pages, her professional mask slipping into something resembling respect. You've been busy, she murmured. For the past 5 years, I said. While they were all looking at Vanessa, I was building this. Margaret leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. And what exactly do you need from me? I own 18% of Sunco Supplies, I said, my voice steady. Vanessa's primary supplier for the resort project. I want to increase my stake to 35%. I need controlling influence. Margaret's eyes sharpened. That's a significant move. I know. And expensive. I'm prepared for that. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. This will take some careful maneuvering, Emily. We'll need to do it quietly. Vanessa can't know. She won't, I assured her. She never bothers to look at me long enough to see what I'm doing. Margaret smiled faintly. Let's get to work. The next few weeks were a blur of calculated moves and careful silence. I transferred funds, bought shares in small increments to avoid suspicion, and secured proxies where necessary. Every call with Margaret was cloaked in mundane excuses, dinner plans, gym memberships, but each one pushed me closer to my goal. While the paperwork moved through the legal channels, I turned my attention to the ground, the very soil where Vanessa was planting her so-called legacy. Tom Mitchell was the project manager for the Carter Oceanfront Resort, a man who had worked under my father for years. He respected the Carter name, but he was also practical. And he was tired. Tired of Vanessa's impossible deadlines. Tired of her vanity projects masquerading as progress. I found him at the site one afternoon, standing under the Florida sun with a clipboard in hand, barking orders at a crew struggling to install decorative palm trees. Emily? He looked surprised, wiping sweat from his brow. Didn't expect to see you here. I wanted to check in, I said, forcing casualness into my tone. See how things are going. He snorted. Depends on whether you want the truth or the version Vanessa's giving the investors. I raised an eyebrow. Let's start with the truth. We stepped aside, into the shade of an unfinished cabana. Tom leaned in, his voice dropping. Vanessa's demanding imported Italian marble for the bathrooms. Custom furniture from Paris. Special order light fixtures from some boutique in New York. None of it's realistic on this timeline. We're stretched thin. And the suppliers are nervous. I nodded, absorbing every detail. This was what I needed, proof of her recklessness. Keep me updated, Tom, I said. Discreetly. He hesitated, then gave a tight nod. You're the only Carter I trust to fix this. That night, I started collecting emails, delivery schedules, cost overruns. Every piece of evidence showing that Vanessa's vision was not only unrealistic, it was dangerous. She was cutting corners, rushing construction, pushing suppliers past their limits. One wrong move, and the entire project could collapse. But gathering information wasn't enough. I needed someone who could amplify it when the time came. Someone with reach. Jessica Reed was a name I'd known for years, an investigative journalist who had built a reputation on exposing corruption in Miami's business circles. She had taken down developers who bribed city officials, construction companies that used substandard materials, and CEOs who cut safety protocols to boost profits. We met for coffee at a small shop far from the glossy beachfront resorts. She was sharp-eyed, no nonsense, and she saw through me immediately. So, what are you really here for, Emily? She asked, stirring her espresso. Family drama? Or something bigger? I leaned in, lowering my voice. Let's just say. I think the Carter Oceanfront Resort might not be the flawless masterpiece my sister claims it is. Jessica's eyes lit up. What kind of problems? I didn't give her everything, just enough to pique her interest. Supply issues. Budget strain. Timeline pressure. Keep watching, I told her. When the cracks start showing, I'll make sure you're the first to know. Jessica smiled, her reporter instincts already firing. I like you, Emily. You're not as sweet as they say, are you? I laughed, but there was an edge to it now. No. Not anymore. Every move I made was calculated, every conversation rehearsed. I smiled when I passed Vanessa at family events, congratulating her on the resort while she bragged about her latest investor dinner. She had no idea that while she was sipping champagne, I was signing documents that would give me the power to crush her entire project. I played my part well, the good sister, the kind one. But underneath, I was building an empire of my own. There's a certain satisfaction in knowing something the other person doesn't. Every time Vanessa posted a glamorous construction update on social media, every time she smiled for the cameras with her gold-plated shovel, I knew that I held the strings. And soon, I would pull them. Have you ever had to stay silent while someone underestimated you, knowing that one day, you would prove them wrong? Comment 444 if you're excited to see the tables turn. 2 months after my meeting with Margaret, the final piece of my plan slid into place with a satisfying click. I had quietly secured 35% of Sunco supplies, granting me controlling influence over the company my sister's entire resort project depended on. Vanessa still had no idea. She was too busy basking in her own spotlight, attending Miami society galas, and posing for glossy photo shoots with headlines like the Queen of Coastal Luxury and Carter Legacy, in good hands. Every article was another dagger in my chest, a reminder of what they had taken from me. But this time I wasn't just swallowing the pain. I was sharpening it. I sat in the Sunco boardroom overlooking Biscayne Bay, as the CEO, Paul Jennings, laid out the numbers for the quarter. The numbers were solid, Sunco was profitable, but stretched thin. Vanessa's resort was the largest single project on their books, and her increasing demands, Italian marble, French imported furniture, accelerated timelines, were beginning to spook the more conservative shareholders. I've run the projections, Paul said, his tone careful. If the Carter project fails or hits further delays, we're exposed. It's a high-risk situation. Exactly what I needed to hear. I leaned forward, my voice calm but firm. I agree. We need to protect this company. I moved to suspend all supply commitments to the Carter Oceanfront Resort until their financials and construction schedule stabilize. The room shifted. Heads turned. Paul hesitated, but I pressed on. Sunco can't afford to gamble on vanity projects driven by ego. We need stability, not headlines. The vote was called. It was close, but my shares tipped the scale. Within 15 minutes, Sunco had officially pulled out of Vanessa's project. Her supply chain was gone. I walked out of that boardroom feeling taller than I ever had. I had done it. I had taken back control, not just over Sunco, but over my life. The first press article dropped 2 days later. Carter Oceanfront Resort facing delays over supply chain issues. Then came the whispers, investors growing nervous, suppliers pulling back, construction halting mid-phase. Vanessa's perfect empire was starting to crack. And I was watching it all from the shadows. The call came late that evening. Her name flashed on my screen. I let it ring out once, twice. Then, I picked up. Emily, Vanessa's voice was tight, teetering between anger and panic. Did you do this? I smiled into my coffee cup. Do what, Vanessa? Don't play dumb. Sunco pulled out. The suppliers are panicking. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. You've been talking to them, haven't you? I let a silence stretch long enough to make her sweat. Then, I spoke, calm, measured. Guess you underestimated me, sis. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. How dare you? You dared me, I cut in. 4 years. Every time you stepped on me. Every time you laughed at me in front of our parents, our friends, the entire world. You made me small, Vanessa. But you forgot one thing. What? Her voice was venomous. I was watching. And I learned. I know this business better than you think. Better than you. She was silent for a moment, then the mask slipped back on, the practiced, polished version of Vanessa. Fine. I'll fix this. You may have won this round, but this resort will still open. And when it does, you'll still be nothing. I laughed, surprising even myself. We'll see. I hung up, placing my phone on the table with a kind of finality. I had expected triumph to feel like this rush of victory, but what I felt was something deeper, freedom. The next morning, I met Alex for breakfast at our usual spot, a small diner tucked away from Miami's glamour. He was already grinning when I slid into the booth. You did it, he said, eyes sparkling. It's all over the news. I nodded, stirring my coffee. It's only just starting. As I spoke, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Jessica Reed, the journalist I had met weeks earlier. Heard about Sunko. People are talking. Ready to go on record when you are, ****. I typed back one word, soon. I wasn't finished with Vanessa. Not yet. The following week was a slow-motion disaster for her. Reporters began digging into the delays. Investors publicly voiced concerns. Tom, the project manager, started leaking more details, rushed orders, unapproved materials, unsafe construction practices. The Carter name, once untouchable, was now being whispered about in terms like reckless and unstable. I knew it was bad when Margaret called me. You've stirred up quite the storm, she said. There was a note of admiration in her voice. Good, I replied. It's time people saw her for who she really is. Vanessa tried to salvage things. She called emergency investor meetings, promised expedited solutions, even staged another press conference to project calm. But I watched her closely. Behind the poised exterior, the cracks were showing. Her voice wavered when reporters pressed too hard. Her smiles were tighter. Her eyes, for the first time, looked unsure. The final blow came when Jessica's article went live. Inside the crumbling foundation of Carter Oceanfront Resort, delays, overspending, and family feud. It was brutal. It detailed everything: supply issues, budget spirals, Vanessa's impossible demands. There was even a section questioning her leadership compared to other Carter family members. My name was never mentioned, but the implication was clear. People were starting to wonder if the wrong sister had inherited the empire. Vanessa called me that night. I didn't answer. Instead, I poured a glass of wine, sat on my balcony overlooking the city, and let myself feel it, every ounce of satisfaction, every bit of power I had reclaimed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the good sister. I was the one pulling the strings. Did she deserve it? After everything she had done, all the humiliation, the condescension, the years of being treated as less, did Vanessa deserve to watch her empire crumble? What do you think? Comment 555 if you think she deserved it. The dust had long settled when I stood once more on that same patch of land where Vanessa had once planted her golden shovel into the ground with such pride. The site that was supposed to be her crowning achievement, the Carter Oceanfront Resort, was now mine. But it wasn't the gleaming luxury hotel she had envisioned. No marble bathrooms. No Parisian furniture. No ribbon-cutting ceremonies with society elites sipping champagne. Instead, it had become something better. Something real. Carter Community Hub. The sign was simple, unpolished, but it stood proudly at the entrance. Behind it was a place where dreams were built from hard work, not inheritance. Rows of small office spaces lined with floor-to-ceiling windows, communal work areas buzzing with ideas, and a cafe filled with young entrepreneurs nursing coffee cups as they sketched their futures onto napkins. Startups were finding their footing here, local artists, small tech ventures, women launching their first businesses. People who, like me, had been told they weren't good enough. It was everything Vanessa's resort was supposed to represent, but it was built on a foundation of resilience, not arrogance. I ran my fingers over the wooden sign, feeling the texture of something earned, not gifted. This land, this project, was no longer a symbol of her failure. It was a symbol of my beginning. It had been a year since her empire collapsed. The media frenzy surrounding the Carter oceanfront resort's downfall had burned hot and fast. Reporters picked apart every detail: the financial mismanagement, the reckless spending, the supply chain debacle. Vanessa had tried to salvage it. She called for emergency funding, proposed a scaled-back version, even begged some of the same investors who once worshipped her. But the Carter name was tarnished. And no one was willing to take another risk on her. Eventually, the foreclosure notices went up. Equipment was hauled off. The construction site became a skeleton, half-finished and abandoned, an uncomfortable reminder to everyone driving along the coast that power could shift in an instant. Vanessa disappeared from Miami's high society scene. The last I heard, she had moved to a modest rental in a quiet suburb with her ex-boyfriend, a man who once sold boats at a marina but now managed a hardware store. It wasn't the picture-perfect future she had curated on social media, but life had a way of humbling the proud. We hadn't spoken since our last phone call, the one where her voice cracked with rage as she realized her sister had beaten her at her own game. Until today. I heard her before I saw her. "Emily?" I turned. She stood by the entrance to the hub, looking different. The polished veneer was gone. No designer suit, no heels sharp enough to draw blood. She wore jeans and a plain blazer, hair tied back into a simple ponytail. She looked ordinary. Human. We stood there, two sisters who had waged war on each other, now meeting on the battlefield long after the fight had ended. "This is yours?" she asked, gesturing around her. Her voice was softer than I remembered. I nodded. "Yeah. It is." Her eyes scanned the hub, people typing away at laptops, voices pitching with excitement over new ideas. A woman in her 50s was leading a small seminar for single mothers starting home businesses. The energy was different from any grand opening Vanessa had ever hosted. It wasn't for show. It was for something lasting. Vanessa swallowed. "It's good. Better than what I had planned." I blinked, surprised by the honesty. She sighed, her gaze dropping. "I was wrong, Emily. About everything. You proved me wrong. You proved all of us wrong." Her words should have felt like victory, an admission I had craved for years. But they didn't. Because somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't fighting her anymore. I had been fighting the version of myself I thought I had to be, the one desperate for their approval. I smiled, but it wasn't triumphant. It was just free. I didn't do it to prove you wrong, Vanessa. I did it to prove myself right. We stood there in silence, the waves crashing softly in the distance. For the first time in our lives, we weren't adversaries. We were just two women, two sisters, both scarred, both changed, both still standing. Before she left, she hesitated. "I'm applying for a small business loan. I want to start something, smaller this time. Real. I don't expect help, but I thought you should know." I nodded. "Good luck, Vanessa." "I mean it." She smiled, an awkward, hesitant thing, but it was real. A few weeks later, I got a text from her. "Loan approved. Starting small. Doing it right this time, asterisk asterisk." I replied simply. "That's how the best things are built." I pinned her message beside my mother's old letter, the one that once reduced me to the kind one. Because now, I knew that kindness was never weakness. It was my strength. It had led me here, to a future built with my own hands, not given as a gift. The Carter name no longer belonged to Vanessa. And it no longer haunted me. It was mine now. And it finally meant something. Do you believe that strong women always win, especially when they choose to build something for themselves? Comment 666 if you believe strong women always win. Looking back now, standing here with the Carter Community Hub thriving behind me, I realized something I never understood when I first started this journey. I thought I was fighting for payback, for revenge against Vanessa, against my parents' belief that I was only the kind-hearted one. I thought success would mean watching her fail, proving to everyone that they were wrong about me. But what I've learned is that true success, the kind that lasts, isn't about tearing someone else down. It's about building something that matters, something that stands tall long after the dust settles. When I first held that letter from my mother, the one telling me I wasn't strong enough to carry the family legacy, it felt like a life sentence. Like my own parents had decided I was destined to be small, to be less. But they were wrong. And if you've ever been made to feel like you weren't good enough, by your family, by your boss, by someone who was supposed to believe in you, you know exactly what that pain feels like. But here's the truth, no one gets to decide your worth, but you. No one gets to define what you're capable of. I spent years letting their opinions shape the way I saw myself. But the moment I stopped seeking their validation and started building for myself, that's when everything changed. I built this. I created something from the ground up, not to prove them wrong, but to prove to myself that I was always capable. I just needed to believe it. So, if you're watching this right now and you feel like you've been overlooked, underestimated, or pushed aside, don't let that define you. Use it. Let it fuel you. Build something for yourself. Whether it's a business, a dream you've put on hold, or simply the life you deserve, start now. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's creation. It's proving to yourself that you were worthy all along. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like you had to prove yourself to people who didn't believe in you? Have you ever turned your pain into something powerful? Share your story in the comments below. Let's support each other, because we all deserve to be seen. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you feel something, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to this channel. There are more stories like this, real stories of resilience, revenge, and rising above. Together, we'll keep proving them wrong. Together, we'll build something better.